Hey everyone, and welcome back to episode 7. There we go. Already got it wrong. Episode 7 of the Developers Unplugged podcast. Obviously joining me today, a very special guest is Edele. Edele, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you on. Pleasure to have you on. So I guess Edele, you've been in obviously engineering for such a long time, really just kind of going straight into this. Like, for anyone that maybe isn't aware of what you do or maybe don't know who you are specifically, what's a bit of a background obviously on yourself at the moment?
Yeah, so my name's Edele. I am the engineering people lead at Mimi Hearing Technologies, who are based in Berlin. Engineering people lead isn't a title that you may have come across before, and there's a couple of reasons for that. So I took over this role about a year ago, where we had 2 engineering managers previously doing the job. And we decided at that point kind of to restructure the responsibilities. And what we found that we really needed was someone who is there basically supporting all of our engineers on a regular basis and supporting them with their development, with their growth, any issues or challenges that come up. And more of that rather than the traditional engineering manager who might be more in terms of the strategy or might be a bit more hands-on in terms of coding as well. Sometimes you get a mix. And yeah, because there were, I had 14 direct reports whenever I first started this role.
Wow.
It was like, okay, we really need to slim down what kind of things I can take over. And yeah, it was just a really nice progression. Before that, I had spent around 10 years in agile coaching. So
Nice.
had a lot of experience at various companies, including my own. And before that was a software engineer in different disciplines. So I've been in the industry for quite some time.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of different changes over the years, of course, and still loving the current challenge.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks for obviously giving us a bit of an overview there. Obviously, a lot of people I think will probably be like, hey, hold on a minute, you're not German, you're not from Berlin. So how did that happen? Like, what was the reason why you kind of moved to Berlin?
Yeah, so maybe going back to where I'm from originally. So I'm from Northern Ireland and I moved to university. So when I was 18, crossed the water like many people over to England and studied at Bournemouth University. And while I was at university, I got the chance to do an internship, so a year in industry. And I randomly chose a company in Germany, in Bavaria, to go to. Had never stepped foot in the country before, but I like to throw myself into challenging situations, it seems. And yeah, so that was basically what started it, is that first year where I spent in Germany at an early age. Then I went back to university, met my partner and worked in various jobs in England. And then I was quite happy where I was actually at the time, but my partner was looking for a new job. We were living in Kent, which is in the southeast of England, for those not familiar.
Yeah.
And he really didn't want to move to London. And he really was like, well, I don't see how I grow in my career. He's also in tech. We met at university. And I was like, well, hey, I had that year in industry in Germany. Well, let's look at Germany. And we also had the political situation with all of the talks coming up to the referendum on Brexit. And so we made the jump to Berlin. He actually found his job first, moved over for 6 months to see if it would work out for him, and it did. And then I started looking for a role and found one fairly quickly and moved over as well.
Amazing. And you're now not living in Berlin, are you? You're now, unfortunately, I mean, I say unfortunately, it's I think I'm just always jealous whenever I speak to you, and you've always got like the sunshine and whatnot all behind you as such. You're now in Lanzarote at the moment, aren't you? But you was in Berlin, I think, what was you, like 5 or 6 years, was it?
7
years.
In Berlin?
Yeah, 7 years. So obviously amazing.
Yeah.
What was some of, like, when you in the first year, because I'm sure obviously you kind of it maybe took a bit of adjusting. I've been to Berlin quite a few times now. A lot of my network is, of course, within Berlin. Pretty much all of my network's in Berlin, of course. And I always meet people, obviously, that I'm working with at that time. It's such a unique culture, isn't it? It's so unique. And to the point where I just I can't explain it to someone that's never been there. Like it's in a great way. You know, I love the culture. I think it's a really cool culture. But what was
Yeah.
some of like in the first year, like some of the key adjustments that you had to kind of make in terms of obviously like the culture, the way of living as such in Berlin, of
Yeah.
course.
So I was quite lucky because I'd had that internship experience, and I'd also worked at companies where I got to work with different types of people from different backgrounds, and I was
Mm,
already used to kind of dealing with communication and working with people who may not have English as their native language. And so that
yeah.
wasn't really too much of a thing for me to overcome.
Hmm.
When I first moved to Berlin, specifically, I think a lot of people can relate to the amount of bureaucracy at first and going to all of those official appointments, the registration. And I really had it easy because I'm from an EU country. So I know people going through the visa process really can come up with a lot of issues in regards to that. But in general, I didn't have it too difficult whenever I first moved to Berlin. I think I was also at an age where I kind of just embraced the different backgrounds. But of course, there's a lot of things that you have to learn, especially when working with German people, but also people who don't have English as their first language. If you're working at an English-speaking company, then things that I've had to learn over time is to really
Yeah.
slow down and maybe use more simpler language than you might use when you're talking to people from your own country.
Mm,
And just also accepting like different cultural backgrounds might react in different ways. So for example, someone might get offended by something that you say and you don't really understand why, and then
sure.
it's just a matter of having a conversation and figuring out why that was offensive and trying to not just leave it and then it blows up into something uncontrollable or you just can't work together, and just acknowledging that and being aware that there are differences and sometimes it doesn't always go so smoothly.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned as well, obviously, that like the first bit of, well, your first experience really with Germany was in Bavaria, right? And
Yeah.
then obviously you were speaking with your partner, and obviously that was like a suggestion as well. I think obviously with the UK politics as well, I don't blame you at all. You know, it was a bit of a crazy time. Why not go? And this is just really kind of almost putting you on the spot here a little bit, but why not go back to like Bavaria? Why was it Berlin that actually was specifically the location in Germany for you that you
Yeah,
moved to?
so Bavaria was quite tough when I was there for my internship. So I didn't know a single word of German whenever I first went there.
Sure.
And the other people working at the company said, oh, the job is in English, your team speak English, there's no need for you to learn German. And my very first day, I tried to get a bus. And I knew like a little bit of like how to order a bus ticket, but the accent completely threw me, and I really found it difficult to integrate there at first. Also, a
Yeah.
lot of my colleagues were much older Germans who hadn't had the opportunity to learn English at school. And so I was sitting next to people who we couldn't communicate. We were like maybe communicating through body language, but that was it. And so I did an immersive German class and things like that. But my partner, of course,
Mm.
when we made the decision to move back to Germany, didn't know German at all. And we just looked at where there were the main tech jobs. He
Yeah.
really wanted to work at a startup. And at that time, there weren't so many startups appearing in Bavaria. And we looked at the job market in Berlin, and it looked fairly easy for us to both get roles there. We'd been to Berlin a few times just on holiday, and we liked the city. We liked the different green parts of it.
Yeah.
And we thought, yeah, let's give it a go. And
Why
at
not?
first we thought it would be maybe 2 or 3 years, and then maybe we would move back to England, or maybe we would move somewhere else. But as I said earlier, it was 7 years. So the twists and turns of life bring you
Yeah.
to different places at different points in time.
What a great story. Like I say, I mean, sometimes you just can't like you can't really like predict the future, really, can you? In the sense of, you maybe thought that you was going to stay there for a few years, then it was 7 years, and who knows, potentially you may go back to Berlin in the future, potentially. Obviously, like I say, you're now obviously working for a Berlin-based company, Mimi, which is obviously a startup in Berlin, but actually working remotely from Lanzarote as well, which is really cool. So you mentioned obviously earlier as well, right now your current situation is that you're working at Mimi, and you have done for, I think, a few years now, right?
3 years. Yeah.
Amazing. And obviously you've kind of integrated into quite a unique role. So it's an engineering, again, correct me if I'm wrong here. So it's an engineering people
No,
lead.
engineering people lead. Yes.
I had the words right. It was just in the wrong order. So it's quite a unique role. Like, obviously I work within the space, and I honestly don't actually know anyone that has that job title. I guess what would make that different? I know you kind of touched on it sort of earlier, but what would make that difference to maybe a traditional engineering managing position specifically? What are like some of the key differences?
So as I said earlier, when I stepped into the role, I was taking over from two people who did have the job title engineering manager. And what we found when we looked at the role, there were kind of two parts. It's like when someone has an expectation of what a role involves, they might expect that the next person stepping into that role does the exact same things, even if it doesn't necessarily fall into the responsibilities of that job, on like a job advert or something that someone was doing. So for example, one of the engineering managers before did a lot with the office networking. That is not my forte at all. So that was definitely something that I was like, networking was never my strong suit, even at university. So I'm going to hand that over to someone else. And we really took our time to come up with the defined roles. And I think at Mimi, it's very unique the way that we're set up, because we have our chief technology officer, which is more or less what you would expect from that role. Then you have me as the engineering people lead, and we also have tech leads, and our tech leads don't have manager, so they don't have any management responsibilities, they don't have any direct reports. And I think that's quite different to other companies who have that kind of tech lead position, which might be a combination of a lead engineer versus the management kind of thing that I am doing. And so my primary focus is on the people, as I said, within the engineering department, and also a couple from our research department as well. And my focus is really on supporting them. So it's really about making sure that they have everything that they need to do the best job that they can, that if they sometimes experience some issues, like I've had some engineers come to me who are experiencing imposter syndrome, and kind of coaching them through that kind of thing, and also helping them to identify their career growth and their learning and development goals, and to make sure that they're not the same person who we hired. And that's really, really one of my core values, is ensuring that people are always growing, they always have a space to move into. And I think that's quite different to some of the engineering manager roles that you might see elsewhere on job boards.
Yeah, definitely. I really like the position, and it's almost like a bit of a moment now that I've kind of thought about, like, why does every company not have that? Engineers and engineering teams often have so many challenges, whether it be imposter syndrome, or whether it be maybe conflicts amongst the group, or maybe people just aren't feeling totally happy. And this is something that applies to everyone, not just engineers, but everyone always performs better when they're happier, right? When problems are resolved. And it's quite strange to me, actually, why that this isn't just a position in every single company. I want to talk about women in tech, by the way, because it's definitely a topic that I think everybody always talks about as such. But the main question that I always have, especially when I become a tech recruiter, obviously focusing in Berlin, is like, why do I not speak to more sort of like female software engineers? It's so male dominated. And I guess, just, again, kind of putting you on the spot here a little bit, Edele, but why do you think that is? Because everyone has their theories, but I wanted to ask you, obviously being in this space for such a long time, why do you believe that maybe there's not as many female engineers as there is maybe male.
Yeah, I mean, the industry as a whole, I think, is very much male dominated, and it has been for the entire time that I've been in tech. Maybe it goes back to, my feeling is that it goes back to even schooling. So when I was at school, I went through the UK system, so similar to what you did, Harry.
Yeah.
And at 16, if you're going to university, you basically pick your subjects, you pick the course that you want to study at university, and then you go off on that. And I actually wasn't going to study anything in tech. I didn't think that it was a career that was open to me. And what changed my mind on that is that, well, actually, I had already drafted all of my application letters for the universities that I wanted to apply to. I was very much focused on the sciences. So for my A levels, which are the subjects that you do from 16 to 18, I picked all sciences. So biology, chemistry, physics. And then I chose ICT as the kind of like the fun one that doesn't really matter. It's not going to lead to my career. Yeah. And so I was going to go to university to study chemistry. I had all of that kind of mapped out for me. And then what happened was that after my GCSEs, which are the exams that you take when you're around 16 years old, there was this system that was run. It was sponsored by some big companies, and they chose the top, I think, 12 female performing people in information and communication technology at that level per year. Mm-hmm. And I got invited to this ceremony. So nice. Where they presented the awards. Cool. So I was in one of the top 12 in Northern Ireland for GCSE ICT. And then the big awards ceremony was in Stormont in Belfast, which is kind of like going to Westminster or the Bundesrat. Yeah, it was like this big ceremony. It was very memorable for me. And they had a lot of female speakers who were working in tech in various roles. And it really just inspired me. And in that moment, it was like, yeah, this is cool. I never thought that I could do a job in tech, even though it was something that I really liked. You know, I dabbled with HTML. I was like really, really into computers and stuff. And so from that moment on, I then looked into university courses. And I think it's quite daunting because it is such a male-dominated industry. And I also was a little bit scared of like the courses. Like I purposely ruled out anything that was called computer science because I just have visions of people in hoodies and basements. And I was like, I don't want that kind of role. That's not me. And so I chose a course that was called computing, that was very broad. It had everything from networking, as I said, but cybercrime, business. It was a really broad course. And I've spoken to a lot of other women in tech who've had similar stories. Yeah. I've also met people who started their career in tech and then moved out of it. And what you'll also find is that with women who are in tech roles, a lot of the time they are kind of more graduating, or maybe the expectation is for them to take on more of the roles that do have more of the softer skills or the interpersonal skill qualities. So a lot of women become scrum masters, a lot of them become product owners, and they move further and further away from the actual coding or engineering work. Yeah. And I think that is systemic in the system, and it's something that I want to try to change. I mean, part of the reason I got into tech in the first place was that I recognized that it was a male-dominated industry. But if you go back to the origins of programming, you know, it stemmed from women in the first place. So I don't really have a firm conclusion as to why that is, but I think it does go back to schooling and how we're taught. And, you know, whenever I first chose to go to university to study computing, so many people talked me out of it. I didn't have a single person be like, you should go for this, but I was very headstrong. You know, I had teachers saying, you'll never understand programming, like
Really?
you won't understand it, you'll drop out. Like, people were very, very negative about it, but because I was headstrong, I was able to kind of navigate through that.
Sure.
And a lot of people, unfortunately, don't have that ability to separate that, and maybe that is also something that needs to go back to our education systems and be like, okay, maybe our teachers
Yeah.
should be more supportive of the types of careers that we're choosing to have.
Yeah, it's a really tough subject, isn't it? Like there isn't really a conclusion. There's not one or two answers that we can go, oh, this will increase, women in tech, because it's just so underlined. There's such a deep problem, in my opinion, a deep problem with that. And yeah, it probably does go right back to school, maybe even childhood as well. You look at, like, I'm sure if we was to Google, even now in 2024, if we was to Google programmers, they're probably just going to be loads of men in hoodies, right? And that, I think, as a woman, as a female, you probably look at that and go, "God, that looks quite terrifying," as well as also learning programming, which is within itself very terrifying. You're going to be around people that maybe are completely different to yourself. And ultimately, I think a lot of women, unfortunately, again, like you mentioned, maybe move away from the actual coding aspect of it, unfortunately, which is really a huge, huge shame. Maybe because of fear, or maybe because they feel that they could get judged. Is there, like, anything, especially obviously yourself, obviously being more in a leadership position now, specifically in an engineering startup in Berlin, is there anything that you, like, actively do to maybe increase diversity within the team? Is there anything that maybe you've done unique over the last few years? Because I know that a lot of companies struggle with obviously attracting just a range, basically, of obviously developers to join their company.
Yeah. I don't think that there's anything that I necessarily do that is unique to that, but I do have the perspective of coming from being a woman as to what kind of jobs that I would apply for. And I think it comes down to the job description by itself. So women are more unlikely to apply for a job if they feel like they don't meet all of the criteria, myself included. When I've been younger in
Yeah.
the career, if it says 5+ years of experience and you only have 3 years, a woman will automatically say, no, I'm not qualified for this role, whereas a man would probably apply anyway. And so I look at the job offer and try to make it more appealing. So at the bottom of any job description that I put out, it says, while you may not meet all of the requirements, please apply anyway, because I think that it's like more, I hire for potential rather than the skills. And I don't try to have a bias against, I hire for the role and the best qualified candidate. Sometimes it's a woman, sometimes not. But I think just being able to relate to women candidates, and I've had a lot of female applicants be surprised whenever they're being interviewed by a woman. And so I would say that try to encourage other people who are in your department, who are women or a minority, to get more involved in the interview process, because sometimes it's left out to the managers or the team.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for the candidate to actually speak to other people. Of course, you may
Yeah.
not have women in your tech team, and that's a different problem. What you could do in that instance is what I did at a previous company was to have meetups, like women in tech meetups, code academies that are specifically aimed towards minority groups. I don't want to make this all about women.
No.
And also that just trying to put your presence out there a little bit more and recognize the types of skills that women can bring, without trying to steer the job description in too much of a biased way towards women, but also just so that they're more likely to apply. So maybe looking at your requirements and thinking, if you were a woman and you're like wondering whether you're qualified, and it says a specific technology and maybe they have a related technology, maybe give that as an option. So instead of just putting that one technology down. So for example, with databases, maybe they've worked with Postgres but not Mongo, and give both options. Why not?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really interesting perspective and a good comparison in terms of the job description, because you're absolutely right. Obviously, we're both, I'm a recruiter, you're a hiring manager. We both have people that apply for our job adverts. And honestly, I never really have any women that apply for any of the job adverts I have, whereas there are a lot of maybe underqualified male developers that will definitely apply for my job adverts. And it's so sad to hear that, the likelihood is that maybe like a woman wouldn't, if there's just like one bullet point that they're missing. Typically, you're never going to hit every single bullet point. So I always say, definitely always bite the bullet. If you think that you're right for the company, why not? Always apply. But it's such a shame that actually, yeah, most women obviously, unfortunately, maybe look at every single small detail and like, oh no, sorry, I won't. And they miss out probably on so many different opportunities because of that. Whereas obviously, again, you mentioned obviously males are more likely to just kind of go forward. But yeah, like I say, it's just such a shame really to sort of see that as such. And I spoke to a woman last week who had been a software engineer for about sort of 6 or 7 years, which is quite rare, really. There's quite a few sort of like junior female, obviously, engineers recently, which is really nice. But like you mentioned, unfortunately, sometimes they move away from engineering for whatever reasons, which is, again, still a huge problem, a massive issue, I think, that we have to all work together to try and prevent. But she's been in engineering, hands-on writing code for like 7 years, which is really cool. And I just kind of asked her, like, how that been, how her journey had been, obviously so far. And she said, you know what, like, it's been like actually amazing. And one of the things that she considers when she's looking at new companies is she looks at the leadership. So if there's just men in the leadership, it typically shows that maybe the company's not very inclined to give her a pathway. Whereas she said one of the biggest pulls for her personally is maybe having like her direct manager being a woman, or having someone that she can kind of look up to in the company that is maybe like female. And I think the fact that that was such a massive pull for her is quite telling, because most companies, they have like benefits and whatnot to try and like increase inclusion, and they'll put on these like crazy benefits and whatnot, which are great, of course, as well, in part of like a compensation package. But I think just naturally, just having like great diversity amongst a team, that's, I would argue, is probably one of the most powerful things. I don't know about yourself, Edele, but I'd probably say that's probably one of the most powerful things in terms of obviously, considering kind of moving forward, maybe from like a female perspective. Obviously, I can only say so much, of course, from what she had said, of course, but no, I just found it really interesting. But yeah, like I say, it's just such a shame, obviously, that we're still kind of going through this, but it is what it is.
Yeah. But I've also met some amazing women, trans women of color who work in tech, and it's absolutely amazing to hear their stories. And I don't think of myself as a minority anymore, because maybe it's because I've been in the game for so long. But yeah, just hearing like the struggles that they've gone through as well, it's like also something that I'm aware of, and something that I try to make sure that we try to tailor our job descriptions for them. And so far it's been working really well. Like we do get a lot of candidates, even from African countries. Like there are a lot of women in Kenya and Nigeria who are just absolutely amazing. And I think being aware of it's a first step. And then also maybe it is a part of it is to do with the leadership teams and who they're going to be working at. I mentioned earlier that some of my direct reports come from the research team, and that came from the same kind of thing, where there was a woman working in the research team who felt like she couldn't really relate to her manager, who was a man, and maybe they weren't meeting as often as she would like. So she specifically requested, she came to me, we had a lunch together, and she asked if I would maybe take her under my wing and be her manager. And that was something that I needed to think about, because I was like, well, I'm not a researcher. I don't have that research background. Can I really support this person or not? And in the end, it's been working really, really well. I really enjoy my collaboration with her. She's absolutely brilliant and has so much potential that wasn't really looked after previously. So I'm really, really happy to work with her.
That's amazing. And obviously you work so closely as well, like with the engineering team at the moment, and your job is to do like 1,000,001 things, but ultimately obviously to make sure that they're healthy, they're happy, they've got everything that they need, like you mentioned earlier, to do the job right. You mentioned about like imposter syndrome. I've heard this actually quite a few times, specifically in engineering. Is this quite a common thing that you kind of had to deal with, that like developers and engineers have come to you and said, like, I think I've got this? Like, and how have you basically got them out of that? Because it's such a difficult mindset, and it's state of mind. There we go.
Yeah.
You can tell it's Friday. You can tell it's been a very long week. It is such a difficult state of mind to obviously get out of. How have you managed that when the developers kind of come with you with
Yeah. So maybe coming back to the first question about how common it is. So it's not very common for them to come to you and be like, I think I've got imposter syndrome. Sometimes it happens, but more often than not, is that someone will come to you and maybe say, you know, I feel like my work doesn't matter. I look at my peers on my team and I feel like I can't do anything. I'm not contributing anything of value. And we kind of unpick what the reasons are that led to that point of the engineer feeling that way. And then we come up with strategies as to how to deal with it. And that's mainly going back to what their main motivations are. And a lot of the time with engineers, they don't know what motivates them until you start talking about them and you see their eyes light up about a particular technology or a particular way of working or the types of projects that they want to work on. And then it's about finding opportunities that enable them to be able to work in that way. So it can also be like there are a lot of resources online that basically tells you what imposter syndrome is, that most people encounter it at least once in their lives, and how to kind of overcome it, strategies to overcome it. So alongside finding projects that they are more excited, more motivated for, it's also doing a little bit of self-care, maybe in terms of like just educating yourself that this is a completely normal thing that happens. I would say a lot of engineers go through it at some point, especially if they feel like everyone else in their team has a lot of different experience from them. They might say that they're more talented, more experienced, they've worked with more tech than me. And it's about also acknowledging that your own experiences matter, your own skills matter. And just because you haven't worked with a specific tech stack or a particular language doesn't mean that you're inadequate. It's about, okay, recognizing what do I bring to the table? Sometimes it can be technical, sometimes it's more about, hey, without me on the team, there wouldn't be so much compassion towards how others are doing. There wouldn't be so many people asking for support all of the time. And recognizing that, because I think that is an undervalued kind of set of skills that, especially in engineering, people focus on more of the technical stuff. Whereas I think it's also important, right? I would argue more important to have those interpersonal skills and that support and that team player mindset.
Yeah, and underappreciation is something that I think a lot of software engineers feel. I think particularly also in startups as well. Maybe if there's like a board or the C-suite level comes from a non-technical background, maybe there's like a lack of appreciation from the rest of a company, and that can lead to a lot of software engineers maybe thinking like, and the work that I'm doing, like, is that really for nothing? Like, because the rest of the team don't really get it. And there's so many different things, isn't there, that I think result in maybe, you know, a software engineer having, like you mentioned, obviously having that kind of mindset where they feel that they're a bit of an imposter and maybe they have no purpose at all, which is again so sort of sad, I think, to sort of see, and again so common. You've clearly done such a great job at Mimi over the last sort of 3 years, by the way, Edele, like a great job, and you've been obviously at the forefront of making sure that everyone's been happy and everything's been okay. Massive obviously credit to yourself and to the whole team, because it's obviously a collective of what you guys have achieved so far. What do you feel like in your experience so far, especially kind of being in the position that you're at the moment, which is quite a unique title? What do you feel that an engineering team needs as a whole to kind of perform its most efficient as such, away from obviously having maybe like a great culture? Is there anything else that you think like an engineering team would specifically need, like the kind of like the foundations?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a cliche to say you need a mixture of people, but you
Yeah.
absolutely do. You need people who are doers, you need people who are wanting to grow more into leadership roles, you need people who are maybe junior, like you need people at different levels and also with different types of skills. At Mimi, we have so many different disciplines. So we've got a very broad spectrum of engineers across with different backgrounds, from audio space right into web developers, mobile apps. And I think it's really important to acknowledge what you need. In general, it's a really difficult question to
It's
answer
horrible, and
because
I'm sorry about that.
every engineering team is different, and it depends what kind of culture you want to build and who you can get into that role. And I think, again, it comes back to the hiring process, what kind of questions you're asking, what kind of people that you're looking for. And for me, I said earlier, I hire for potential. So if someone is rhyming off all of their, I don't know, AWS certifications, but can't really give me, you know, pragmatic answers to how would you deal with a specific scenario or a specific challenge with maybe one of your coworkers, if they can't answer that kind of question, then it's probably not going to work out for us. So it's someone who is adaptable and flexible. And I think especially at startups where you're maybe working beyond the limits of your traditional role, everyone has to get their hands dirty.
Absolutely.
And I think recognizing that, but in terms of a general statement, I think it's a really difficult question to answer without the
No,
context.
that's fine. I think you answered it. Again, it's a horrible question, because it can go any way. There's probably a scroll of answers. You could probably, if I gave you an hour, you could probably write 100 different answers. So I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that, but I think you mentioned also about having diversity. Cliche. Of course, it is cliche, but actually, a common problem that I've seen is a lack of creativity in meetings with software engineers, because a company has hired people from the exact same background. So you've just got like a group of like 10 people and they're more or less got the exact same ideas. So actually hiring people from different industries, hiring people from all different age groups and backgrounds and cultures, it's amazing, because you just then have the best outcome possible because everyone has an input. And you know, typically as well, more junior engineers, in my experience, have some of the best ideas out of everyone, you know, and they really keep the seniors on their feet, a little bit on their toes. So they always add a little bit of a spark to the team as well. So yeah, like I say, it's a great answer nevertheless. And sorry for putting you on the spot like I say. But Edele, thank you so much. I just had a look at the time, and I can't believe we've been speaking for such a long time. It's been brilliant having you on the podcast. Thank you so much. Yeah, like I say, it's been, I think, a long time coming. I think you wasn't very well and you was busy maybe, and then I wasn't very well as well. So it's been a long time coming. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me. And I think maybe just a bit of advice for anyone in engineering or anyone who is, I think it goes for general as well, is like one statement that stuck with me from quite a while ago. I think it was 2018, and I saw Henrik Nieberg, who people know from the Spotify model, but also he's written a few books like Lean from the Trenches, I saw a talk in Dublin from him, and he ended his talk with, be brave, be humble, and stay curious. And that's something that's really stuck with me. And it's something that I also feel is important for other people to hear, that just because you are excellent in your role today doesn't mean you'll still be excellent tomorrow. So keep learning, never stop learning, and yeah, be brave when it comes to your applications. And if a role doesn't, if you don't hit all of the bullet points on a job description, apply anyway. What's the worst that can happen?
What an amazing way to end. Edele, thank you so much.
Thank you, Harry.